Everybody, welcome to this Thursday edition of Women's Online Wellness Facebook Live. Dr. Ron Eaker here, and as you can see, I'm coming to you from my office for a couple of reasons. Number one, I just finished patients and I didn't have a chance to go home. So you can see I'm wearing, I don't just work as a doctor, I don't even play one on television. But I'm wearing my scrubs just so I can look legitimate, since tonight we're talking about Cbd oil. But also because we still don't have air conditioning. So we're working on that. They've promised me that by the end of next week we should have some air conditioning, and I'm going to hold them to it or find out where the place is and burn it down, because I'm getting very warm and bothered, and it's bad when you can't go home and relax in the 110 degree Augusta afternoon weather. Anyway, we're here in the office. We're going to talk about CBD oil. Let me warn you that my passive aggressive cleaning crew, Nazis, are wandering around the office today, and I've asked them to kind of leave the vacuum cleaner off and maybe not empty all the trash or clean the toilets right next door to us. So just to prove this is truly indeed live, you may hear some distractions in the background, but just ignore those and we'll get on with what the topic is tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about CBD oil, and that's really a hot topic. We've really had a lot of interest and a lot of people wondering about, what is this stuff? Is it useful? Is it beneficial? Is it helpful? Is it something I should do? And the quick answer is, well, we don't really know right now, but I'm going to explain where the current science is, what the current thought is about this in the medical community, and separate that from some of the hype. See, whenever I hear all the craziness, all the hype around a particular thing, then the first thing I want to do is say, well, does the science meet the hype? Is there actually some legitimate studies that would show that CBD oil is safe and effective in certain things? And the answer is a very few. But unfortunately, because of the nature of the legality of this stuff, and we'll get into that in just a second, there's not been a lot of human studies on the use of CBD oil. There's a lot of white rat studies, but we all know that sometimes those maybe are not the most effective, efficient, and translate into human use. But before we go too far, I want to clear up a few myths about CBD oil, because people are somewhat confused about what it is, where it comes from. Is it just a form of marijuana, etc.? So I spent several hours this afternoon coming up with a chart to explain very carefully and very thoroughly the difference between marijuana and CBD oil. Here is that chart. As you can see, it is very professionally done, but I think it gets the point across. At the top, you see there's a species of plants called cannabis. We all have heard the term cannabis, and basically for many people, cannabis is equal to marijuana, because marijuana is the most commonly referred to plant in that species. But a cousin of marijuana is known as hemp. They are separate plants. They are both under the species cannabis, but they are separate plants. Most of the CBD oil that we get in this country today is a derivative of industrial hemp, not marijuana. Now, you can get it from marijuana, but the vast majority of the oils that we use today do come from hemp. So this is not from marijuana. I think it's important to make that distinction. So what is CBD oil? CBD oil is really, whoops, I almost fell out of my chair there. You can definitely tell this is live. Cannabidiol. Cannabidiol is the chemical name. Now that's to be distinguished from THC, which is tetracannabidiol, which is the THC is the active ingredient, tetrahydrocannabinol, I can never say that, THC. We're going to limit it to that. Is the active psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. It is a type of cannabinoid, which is the broad spectrum of chemicals that are in these cannabis plants. So you've got cannabis plants, you've got hemp and you've got marijuana. Marijuana has a lot of the THC. That's what makes you high and goes to buy out all the ding-dongs at the Jiffy Mart. Hemp is where you get the CBD oil. So it is a form of one of the cannabinoids, in particular cannabidiol, which is a non-psychoactive. It has no impact on your brain. It is a non-psychoactive cannabinoid, but it does have a number of other properties, as do a lot of the other cannabinoids. But it's the one that's been looked at more extensively and is the one that's available now in a variety of products. Hemp-derived cannabinoid, cannabidiol, CBD oil, is legal. It's legal in all 50 states. There are some state regulations that regulate how it's sold and its content, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But it is legal to be sold. In fact, there are several new stores in Augusta that stock it and sell it, and that's due to the Farm Act of 2018, which made this a food substance, so it removed it from a lot of the same regulation the FDA would have. The FDA still regulates it, but not like a scheduled prescription or not like a scheduled drug like marijuana, which has the THC. Most of the hemp-derived CBD oil has to have 0.3% or less of the THC, the active psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, or it cannot be sold legally. So that's a very, very important distinction. People tend to confuse CBD as being a derivative of comes from marijuana or as a derivative of that. Not what you'd be getting if you're going to a store or going online, hopefully. And we'll talk about that. That's an important distinction. That's an important caveat. So I hope that's clear that it is a derivative of hemp. It is a chemical that affects what we call the cannabinoid receptors in our bodies. We actually have a whole system of receptors in our bodies like we would for any other type of hormone or drug, and that's why the things like CBD exerts its effect, because there are these receptors that in various places all over the body, and that's why you can see a variety of potentially different effects from the CBD. I brought my notes along tonight because I want to make sure that I cover everything. So excuse me if I glance down at some of that along the way. Now, hemp, as you know, and many of you already know, is used to make a lot of things. I even have a hemp shirt. They make clothing out of it. They make paper out of it. They make building materials, biofuels. But it's getting ready to skyrocket because CBD oil and its derivatives have become very, very popular. And we're going to see a massive increase in the production of CBD oil from hemp. And I think we're also going to see a massive increase in the studies now that it's legal, now that it's able to be studied. In the past, it was very difficult to do these human studies simply because of the legal restrictions placed on it. Well, now that's opened up. So we're able to do a lot more in the way of studies. In fact, right now at the National Institutes of Health, there's about $15 million of grants that are being directed towards investigating CBD oil and its impact on humans. So let's talk about that a little bit because that's what everybody's interested in. I mean, I don't think anybody really cares too much about the biochemistry and the discussion about terpenes and et cetera. I mean, that's really not that important. What's important is what does it do? Is it safe? Is it effective? And what can I use it for? Well, this really became very in the public's eye a few years back when there was a number of case reports of some rare types of children epileptic seizures that seem to be controlled by the CBD oil. And in fact, that's the only FDA-approved purpose for CBD right now. And there is actually a drug that is made of predominantly CBD oil called Epidiolex. and it is specifically for two rare types of childhood epilepsy. So that is truly the only tested, approved FDA use of the CBD oil. However, there is reasonable amount of evidence in both animal studies and some human studies that it can be useful in instances of chronic pain. People, for example, who have chronic back pain or myalgias or fibromyalgia or muscle pain or joint pain. There's some interesting studies that have looked at it to try to replace or decrease narcotic use. So with the opioid problem that we have in this country right now, there's a lot of interest in looking at the possibility that using CBD oil may be able to reduce the use of these opioids and, if nothing else, maybe decrease the frequency of use. Those studies are ongoing, but they seem somewhat promising right now, and some of the animal studies seem to be very, very interesting. Now, let me just give a broad caveat and say that most of the studies, quality studies done to date on CBD, are done on animals. A lot of that information will be transferable to humans, but we don't yet know that. We can't really say that. When you look at a lot of the websites, for example, and I've spent the last few days looking at all these websites that were selling the CBD oil, making certain claims, and when they would put references on there to make it kind of look like it's official, like they would put a footnote with a reference to a study done from the NIH, and it's a legitimate study, and you go find that and you look at it and it's real, but it was done on rats, or it was done on monkeys, or it was done on snails. There are very few human studies, and the human studies that have been done are generally, at this point, quite small. Now, that the exception is the childhood seizures. Those are very, very well documented and very well done. But the human studies so far are largely relatively small, and not all of them are placebo-controlled, and that's so important. I've talked time and time again about the importance of studies to be placebo-controlled. Let's take, for example, PMS studies. In fact, there's some people claiming that the CBD oil is good for PMS. Well, here's one of the criteria that I look at when I look at those studies. Virtually every study done on PMS shows that almost 35 to 40% of people respond positively to the placebo. And we all know a placebo is an inert substance. It's a sugar pill. It doesn't do anything. But the belief system, the thoughts are so strong that it does impact the symptoms. So whenever you're testing a medication or something like this, as to whether it really works, you got to have a placebo arm. If you don't, it's a totally worthless, wasteful study. And unfortunately, a lot of the small studies done on CBD oil with humans are either very small or there's no placebo group. So we really can't make judgments from that. It's kind of sham science in a lot of ways. But that being said, some of the smaller studies, and a few that were placebo-controlled, did show that there is a potential there for a decrease in opioid use in people with chronic pain. There's some evidence that it might help a little bit with anxiety and depression. That's going to be a very big area of research in the next few years. I think that's an area where, if it is true and if it works, it will be very, very beneficial, because at this stage, there's no evidence of any kind of addictive potential, any kind of problems associated with chronic use. So if that's the case, and it does help with anxiety and depression, then indeed there will be a huge market for that, because there's a tremendous need right now for effective treatments that have few side effects and are not habit forming. But some of the preliminary studies do show that there is a reduction in anxiety. One of the interesting studies is this was done in Brazil, and they took 10 people who were getting ready to do a public speaking event. And as most of you know, public speaking is one of the greatest fears that many people have. Well, they tested these people beforehand and checked different things like heart rate and skin temperature. And then they gave them the CBD oil, and then they tested them afterwards. And they did find that those who had the CBD oil had less of a physiological stress reaction to the speaking than those who didn't. Again, a very small study, but some interesting stuff being done on that. The other area that there has been a few human studies that have documented an effect over and above placebo is with chronic insomnia. People who are having sleep difficulties have shown some benefit from using the CBD oil. Now, again, those are not real large studies, and these were done on people who had chronic problems. I think most would agree right now it's not, oh, I'm going to have trouble sleeping tonight, let me do the oil and I'll drift off to sleep. Can't really say that that's going to make a big difference at this point. We just don't know. But there are a lot of studies that suggest, both animal and human, that suggest, that chronic insomnia may be improved. So if you have any of these issues, should you use this? Should you try the CBD oil? I think it's okay with a couple of caveats, and I think you're going to find out as we go through this in just a moment that you have to be a critical consumer. You have to be smart about it, or you end up just wasting a lot of money and potentially a lot of effort. So let's talk about why or why not you should use it. Probably the biggest why you should is if you're suffering from any of these issues. Most of the current treatments have just a plethora of side effects. Take, for example, chronic pain. People who have chronic pain and chronic discomfort, often using narcotics or nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories that end up eating up your stomach. So these are not benign treatments. You've heard me talk in the past about omega-3 fatty acids and some of the great anti-inflammatory benefits they have. Well, I suspect that the CBD oil is going to turn out to be somewhat effective for chronic pain. So if someone is having that kind of discomfort and there's a possibility that they could cut down on their narcotic use or not have to use them at all, or get some relief in a way that is relatively safe, by all means, do it. Try it. Quite honestly, that's the only way you're going to know. I'm going to talk in just a moment about how to try it. If you're having trouble chronically with insomnia, again, what are your options? There's not that much great stuff out there for it. Sleeping pills, I'm not a big fan of. It doesn't provide actual quality REM sleep. Sometimes they're necessary, or you just be so wiped out you couldn't function. But if there was an alternative that worked, something along the lines like not as much, I'm not a big fan of even Tylenol PM, because chronic use of Benadryl has its disadvantages too. But there are, if this worked for you, my point is it would be wonderful. No one, including myself, can say definitively that it would. It's very much a try and see situation for those conditions. But certainly it's a reasonable option with minimal side effects. And the same thing applies for the anxiety and depression. When you are talking about a medication like this, or a supplement, or a herb, or an oil, you still have to be very cognizant of things like dosing. This is one of the biggest areas of controversy with CBD oil, is in the realm of the dosing. There was a study not long ago in 2018 that randomly tested 20 different bottles of CBD oil independently, and 70% of those 20 were mislabeled with the content of the CBD oil as far as how many milligrams it actually had in there. 70%. About half of them were labeled with too little of the CBD oil, and about half were labeled with too much out of the ones that were mislabeled. So like any over-the-counter product, any product that is not FDA regulated, you pretty much have to depend on the honesty and the integrity of the manufacturer. And we know that's not always the case. We know that this is obviously a profit-driven market, and whenever you have minimal regulations, you're going to have abuse. And this market is exploding. You are going to see massive advertisements, tremendous money put into social media ads with regards to products that are going to be available. And you have to be very, very careful and very smart about how you go about picking and choosing if you decide to try this. So with that in mind, I've got some questions that you have to ask when you're going to buy CBD oil, whether it's in the internet or at a local store. You've got to ask these questions, or you're either wasting your money, wasting your time, or worse, potentially causing yourself harm. The first thing you got to ask is, has this product been tested by a third-party lab? Has it been evaluated by someone outside the company? And that's pretty easy to find, because in legitimate products, most of them that have been tested by third-party outside agencies are going to brag about it. They're going to scream about it because they know that that's a differentiating point from other products. So they're going to plaster their website, they're going to plaster their information with the results of this third-party testing. If you can't find that anywhere on the site, that's a red flag. That's so important. You've got to look for something like, there's a thing called a certificate of analysis that shows that it has been tested by a third party. There's a thing called the International Organization of Standardization, which can test these products and basically say, okay, yeah, it's what it says it's going to be. And unfortunately, you gotta approach it that way. Otherwise, you're asking for trouble. And it should not be hard to find. If you can't find it, chances are it ain't but none. Don't mess with it. As part of that, the lab should also talk about it's free of contaminants. Well, why is that important? Well, because some of these things have contamination. Some of these things have heavy metals, they discovered. There was a case a couple of years ago in Utah where several people got very sick from a batch of CBD oil that was contaminated by heavy metals. So that's important. You can't ignore that. This is not just a benign, oh, well, gee, let me just try this stuff and see if it works. You've got to be smart about it. Got to be a good consumer. Number two, you've got to make sure that whatever product you're looking for and they're looking at has less than 0.3% THC. Remember, that's the psychoactive part. That's the part in marijuana. In fact, you cannot legally distribute CBD oil if you have in some states. Now, that's not in all states. I think it's in Georgia, but not in all states. But in some states, you can't sell that CBD oil if it has greater than that concentration. But that should be available on the label. It should show you very clearly what the concentration of THC is, and that should be less than 0.3. Next, you want to ask, well, what's in the stuff? Because believe it or not, there's a variety of mixtures. You can get this type of oil from a variety of hemp plants grown in a variety of situations. Just as you can get organic vegetables or you can get pesticide-laden vegetables, so you can from the hemp plant. And if you look at a bottle and there are a bunch of different ingredients on there that you don't recognize, it's probably not a good choice. You can also go online and, again, reputable dealers, reputable products are going to be very, very proud of what they're doing. And they're going to list Here's how we grow this. Here's where we buy it from. Here's who manufactures it. Here's our manufacturing process. This stuff's not going to be hard to find, but you got to make the effort. You can't just walk in and say, that's got a pretty cover, I'm going to get that. You're not sure what you're going to get. You don't want to get a thing laced with a bunch of rat poop. You want to know where the hemp was cultivated, where it was grown, and how it was cultivated. That's very important because that can affect the quality of the product that you're doing. And again, this is not something that's going to be impossible. Like, where am I going to find that? I don't have time. I've already got anxiety, depression, and I can't sleep, and a chronic pain. How am I going to find time to research this stuff? Well, the fact is, if it's a legitimate, good product, you're not going to have to spend much time because they're going to be holding it right out front. So don't worry about that. Most of the hemp that comes from the U.S. is really much more regulated than from China or Europe, where the other main source is. So you've got a lot more regulations, and I think there's a greater degree of safety if it shows that it's derived from U.S. grown hemp, made in America. And also, you want to know what kind of CBD is in the product. Now, what does that mean? Well, there's different types of CBD oil mixtures. There's one called a full spectrum CBD. There's one called broad spectrum or CBD isolate. Well, what's the difference? CBD isolate is the pure CBD oil that's extracted. It's basically isolated from the other cannabinoids that are present, and it's about 99% pure. And that's going to have an effect on how much milligrams are in a certain volume and what it's mixed in. Full spectrum CBD is from the hemp plant, but it has all the other cannabinoids with it, including THC. You don't see much of that because it's harder to limit the THC in that. And then you've got broad spectrum CBD, which is basically that same one with the THC taken out. So you want to see if it's CBD isolate or broad spectrum CBD. That's what you're looking for. And what I'll do is, because I know there's a lot of information, excuse me, what I'll do is I'll post all this, the references for all this information on the Facebook page, along with a link to the blog post I did on CBD. So you can have all these references and go back and look at these questions in a little bit more detail and go into a little bit more detail. So I'll post all those references for you so you'll have that later. Now here's a really, really important question to ask is how much of the CBD is in each dosage. This is probably the biggest area of confusion right now when it comes to CBD is how to dose it. And the problem is nobody really knows. That would be a problem, yes. Think of this. We know that Tylenol works for headaches, for example. But if you cut the Tylenol in 12 little pieces and then took one, you're probably not going to get much effect. Well, it's not because Tylenol was crap. It's because you just didn't have the right dosage. By the same token, if you took a whole bottle of Tylenol, your kidneys would fall out. So dosage is important, and I think that's even of much more importance when it comes to CBD because there's no standard. There's no real good information other than some of the studies that are done or that have been done on childhood seizures, some of the studies done on the anxiety and depression. Here's what a lot of folks will say. Start low and build up until you see an effect. Now that is ripe with potential problems because some people will take that literally and they'll just try a dropper full and then a week later 2 dropper fulls and then say the heck with it and just swallow the bottle. Probably not a smart approach. But I would agree with the fact that whenever you're dealing with something like this, you want to start out at a relatively small dose and titrate up in a relatively slow fashion. And again, there are oils, there are capsules, there are tinctures, there are infusions. And each one's going to be different. So that's why you have to look on the bottle to really determine what a particular concentration is. I have seen, literally in my research, I have seen everything from people recommending 15 milligrams as a dose up to 1,800 milligrams. That just shows you we don't really have a clue about what's appropriate and what's safe and what's effective in each person. And there's so many variables that come into play with regards to weight, with regards to size. There's one study that said the appropriate dose was 20 milligrams per kilogram. Well, that's going to be about 1,500 milligrams for an average sized person. But you go into some of these stores and some of the bottles that I saw, and you've got 5 milligrams in what they call their standardized dose. Now that's not getting anything. That's hardly. I mean, that's not going to make a cat feel better. That's just not going to work. So I wish I could be much more specific. I wish I could say you got to start at 15 milligrams and you go up to 30. Well, the fact is we just don't have that information now. We've got a lot of people claiming this is the appropriate way to go, but the science just hasn't caught up to that yet. So that's to me, one of the biggest drawbacks when it comes to using the CBD is it's really kind of a crapshoot when it comes to dosing. And there are people who would argue, there are people who would say, well, no, based on animal studies, we can do this, that, and other. But that's the problem. It's based on animal studies, and the rest of it's largely anecdotal. Now, who's going to argue with you? People who are selling the product. I don't want to be cynical, but everybody's got their opinion. And if you go into a store, here's what you do. This is a very simple way to approach this. If you go into a store and you say, I want something for sleep, whenever the person shows you what they're going to recommend, you say, do you have any references on this? Do you have any literature? Do you have any information about dosing and about effectiveness? And if they can't provide that, it's your call. Do you want to spend the amount of money that you're going to be paying for that? If they can produce that and show that to you, man, that might be worthwhile. And there are some of those studies out there, but the proper dosing is far and few between. I was looking to see real quickly if there was anything else I wanted to cover. Let me just kind of give you the Cliff Note version in the bottom line. Yes, I think there's potential that this could be a product that's going to be beneficial in the area of chronic pain, in the area of insomnia, in the area of anxiety and depression. Whether it pans out into any kind of other metabolic changes, like there's some hints in animal studies it might lower LDL cholesterol. There may be some PMS benefits, maybe anti-inflammatory benefits. The bottom line is with those areas, we have some evidence it might be helpful. If you have a quality product and you can document it by answering those questions and doing your research, then it might be worth trying if you have those kind of symptoms. If you can be selective and be critical and be smart, then it might be worth a try. Otherwise, I would steer clear until the studies are available. There are several things we're going to get from that. One, we'll be able to prove effectiveness. Two, we'll be able to give you a dosing range that can be helpful in trying to gauge what's appropriate for you. And three, we're going to rule out side effects and problems. We're not there yet. That's the reality. You're going to be smashed. You're going to be splattered with ads and social media. I can tell you what's going to happen too if it hadn't already. And I hadn't been attacked by the multi-level marketing folks, but I can guarantee you there's going to be a new multi-level marketing company who's going to be promoting CBD oil, and man, those guys are like snapping turtles. They just, once they get their jaws into you, it's going to be all over. But I can guarantee that's coming also, because it's just too huge a potential market right now for that to be ignored. All I can tell you is be a critical consumer, be smart about it. If you have one of those conditions, use it, and it might help reduce some of the other medications you're using. Talk to your doctor about it. You never want to use an herb or a vitamin or over-the-counter product without at least discussing it with your doctor because of the potential interactions it might have. For example, real quick example, if you're on a blood thinner, you don't want to be taking the CBD oil because it has the same effect as possibly interfering with the effect of the blood thinner, as well as some of the anti-seizure medicines that some people take. So that's just an example. But anyway, I am tired of being in this little cubicle. I feel like I'm a monk in this little isolated space. And you're probably tired of hearing me rant on about the abuse of over-the-counter products. So with that, that's all I have. If you have any questions, please write them in below the Facebook page here, and I'll try to address those and answer those. I'll read everything. Again, thank you so much for the interaction on the website. We've really had a lot of fun with this. We've had a massive influx of interaction. If you're new, and we've got a whole lot of new folks who are kind of interested in hearing about CBD oil. We've got a lot of new folks. If you are new, or if you're just old and cranky and just forget a lot, go on the files and the videos section there and look at all the stuff from the past. We've got a whole bunch of information. I've got even a free book on the file section, a lot of videos. So this is all free. Go there, learn, interact. If you have any questions, concerns, let me know. And if you have a suggestion for next week's Thirsty Thursday, just let me know. See you next time.